Hey everybody, in this video I'll be discussing an easy mistake to make when casting Apprentice Spells for Frostgrave 2nd edition. Hey everybody, I'm Alan with Bricks and Blocks Gaming, the channel that plays tabletop games using toy bricks and blocks and discusses the rules and strategies that build the foundation for those games. There's a mistake that I've seen many people make when casting Apprentice Spells in Frostgrave, and it's a mistake that I made myself through most of my 1st edition campaign. So I thought it'd be good to make a video dedicated on the correct way to cast Apprentice Spells, and also elaborate on the subtle yet potentially significant impact it can have on your gameplay if you happen to be making the same mistake that I made. Just to warn you, I'm going to get pretty technical with wording and numbers and basically nerd out in this video. So I'll be discussing the mistake that I made, how it affects resisting spells, how it affects empowering spells, a specific spell affected by the mistake, and how it affects bookkeeping. So let's get to the bricks and blocks of how to and how not to cast Apprentice Spells in Frostgrave 2nd edition. First, I want to go over some definitions. The casting roll is the d20 roll to cast plus or minus any bonuses, penalties, or empowering. The casting number is the target you are aiming for with this casting roll. The correct way to cast Apprentice Spells is to cast them just like the wizard does, only you apply a -2 penalty to all the casting rolls. The mistake I made was instead of subtracting 2 points from all the casting rolls, I instead added 2 points to all the casting numbers, essentially giving the apprentice their own set of casting numbers that were all 2 points higher than their wizards. I think the reason I made this mistake was because penalties for casting spells from aligned, neutral, and opposed schools are applied as penalties to the casting number. So I made an assumption that all penalties were added to the casting number, and I further applied the apprentice's penalty to this. Then I would chart this like a split stat on my wizard sheet to show the wizard's casting number and the apprentice's. For most spells, whether you use the correct method or the mistaken method won't make any difference on the outcome of those spells. If your wizard's casting number happens to be 14, the correct method for an apprentice spell is to make your casting roll and then subtract 2 to get your result. So you need to roll a 16 or more to achieve the casting number. If you use the mistaken method, you would instead add the penalty to the wizard's casting number of 14 to create a new apprentice casting number of 16. And again, you would need to roll a 16 to cast the spell. So it seems like no big deal which method you use. But an important difference arises with spells that allow a resistance roll, because spells cast with the correct method are actually easier to resist than those cast with the mistaken method. Looking at the previous example with your wizard's casting number of 14, using either method, your apprentice would need to roll a 16 to cast the spell. But with the correct method, that 16 is reduced to 14, making it easier to resist than the mistaken method, which would stay at 16. So playing correctly, if a wizard and their apprentice both rolled a natural 16 to cast this spell, the apprentice's spell would always be easier to resist because the casting roll result becomes 14 instead of 16. One thing to add is about the casting roll minimum rule. This makes the casting roll result for all successfully cast spells bump up to 14 if the number was below that. So with regard to how the mistake affects resisting spells, it only matters in cases where the casting roll result is higher than 14. Another important difference between the two methods is regarding empowering spells. In the 2nd edition, spells cannot be empowered beyond 18. This means that if your wizard's casting number is 17 or 18, using the correct method, An apprentice could empower any roll he made to cast the spell to bring the total casting roll result to the needed 17 or 18. But with the mistaken rule, the wizard's casting number of 17 or 18 would be raised to a 19 or 20 for the apprentice. Since spells can't be empowered this high, the only way for an apprentice to cast these spells with the mistaken method would be to actually roll a natural 19 or 20. A spell that has some unique effects based on which method you're using is Summon Demon, but only if you've leveled that spell's casting number significantly. With this spell, a successful casting summons an imp, but if you succeed the roll by at least 6, something stronger appears. Due to the casting roll minimum rule, any successful casting of the spell bumps its casting roll up to 14. So, once you've reduced its casting number to 8, if your casting roll is an 8 to a 13, which gets bumped up to a 14, you've successfully cast the spell by 6, meaning you'll never get an imp again, and a successful cast will always get you at least a minor demon. If you use the mistaken method and raise your apprentice's casting number instead of applying the -2 penalty, when your wizard has leveled their casting number to 8, your apprentice would still be at 10. So you'd have to spend 2 additional levels to get your apprentice to the magic number of 8 to ensure a successful casting will always succeed by 6 and summon a stronger minion. One last thing I'll mention is the correct method makes bookkeeping and memorization a little bit easier, as you won't have 2 different casting numbers to track. You just can't forget to apply the -2 penalty to all your apprentice's casting rolls. To sum this all up, it's important to subtract the apprentice's penalty from their casting roll, not add it to the casting number they're aiming for. Making the mistake that I did makes apprentice spells harder to resist than they're meant to be, causes some issues with empowering the really hard to cast spells, weakens a strong strategy with Summon Demon, and creates unnecessary bookkeeping. So let me know in the comments if you know any other times this mistake can affect an apprentice's spellcasting. And also let me know if you've ever made the same mistake that I made, or if this has been brand new information as you've been watching this video. I want to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to click like, add a comment, or subscribe so you can keep up with all the content that I'm releasing. And with that, I'm Alan with Bricks and Blocks Gaming, and I'll see you on the next video.